This is magic. How in the world did we do this? When we play with energy, what's possible?
We live in a magical universe, and we just spent the last 3 centuries pretending that we didn't. You need to have an event in your life that makes you realize that you are playing a bigger game. You need an event that gets the awareness that you live in a magical or spiritual universe deep into your bones.
Every action, every thought is a prayer, is a blessing, and you're being watched because every one of those things is an energy going out to the universe.
The spirit world doesn't understand how we experience time very well. The first time you do magic is like the first time you go into a casino and you get beginner's luck.
Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wanted to change your life circumstances or your finances wildly for the better, hopefully that is, then do we have the Chaos Magic Show for you. Today I'll be talking with Gordon White, who runs one of the world's leading magic blogs, has the world-renowned Rune Soup podcast, and is the author of a brilliant book detailing magic for the times, The Chaos Protocols. And that's just what I want to talk with him about today, about calling in magic to change your life. That, plus we'll talk about nuclear starships, Hermanubis, NDEs and ancestral altars, skeletal armies in Bar, and what on earth are the skull experiments, and what in the world shoals and probabilities have to do with anything. So welcome to the show, Gordon. Are you ready to shine?
Very much so, Michael. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. So before we dive right into things, do we live in a magical world?
Yes, we do. Yes, we absolutely do. And we either, it's funny, we either do or we don't, right? It depends if you think magic is something separate that we have to find, or if you think if the mere existence of the universe is itself magical, then it's almost like a redundant description. But I think for most people, it's easier and more exciting to say, yes, we live in a magical world.
I showed up on the Taos Pueblo, Native American Pueblo that's been there for thousands of years. I showed up in the shopkeeper's shop maybe a decade ago. And he goes, "Are you guys runners?" My wife and I look at each other, and we had just written the book Barefoot Running. And we're, yeah. And he goes, "Come back here." And he brings us into the very back of his shop behind everything, which oddly enough, there were gold records on the wall and some interesting paraphernalia. Turns out he was a 2-time Grammy award-winning musician. He holds up these moccasins that I'd seen in a book over 100 years old. And he goes, "I called you here." And he holds up the moccasins that I'd been looking for and searching for because I live in a magical world.
Love it. I think that's sort of what I mean, right? So it's almost as if magic for people who are, in a quote unquote Western context or downstream from European culture, we have to use the word magic to describe things that everyone else, everywhere else, just considers life, just considers normal. Everyone else is living in a context of spirits and angels and plant spirits and all that kind of stuff. And we have this extra word for it because we made a couple of philosophical decisions of questionable quality 3 or 4 centuries ago. And that's to come back to the question, like, do we live in a magical universe? Yes, if you are Western. Perhaps no. Perhaps it's just called the universe if you live somewhere else.
It's interesting because if we go back and we look at the origins of Harvard, if we look at Sir Isaac Newton, if we look at any of the greats in the past, if we look at Darwin, you find extremely spiritual, in quotes, or magical institutions and magical individuals. This has been woven into our existence.
Absolutely. The cornerstone thinkers of the last couple of centuries, almost without fail, have been delightfully spiritually odd. We wouldn't have quantum physics without people's interest in the Vedas. We wouldn't have, as you say, biology, and in particular Lamarckianism, which is itself coming back, but and even coming back to Descartes. And I do lay a lot of blame for our erroneous theory of mind with Descartes, but he came up with his I think, therefore I am, because he was a good Catholic boy trying to effectively save or prove God in a world where all about him there were, new geologists and people sort of coming for the foundations of what we considered spiritual and religious 3.5 centuries ago. So even the guy who's significantly to blame. And it wasn't necessarily him, it was the people who used his ideas and came afterwards for our idea that mind is separate from body or separate from the universe in general. He did that for spiritual reasons. He was literally trying to find a proof for God that will survive in a scientific era.
Thank you. And let's dive to proof. I wasn't planning on going here this early, but Dr. Dean Radin, dear friend of mine, we've had him on the show many times, and he's the head of the Center for Noetic Sciences, where I'm going to lead the witness here. Has science proven magic?
It's a deep philosophical question about the shortcomings of empiricism. But what it has, the short answer is yes. The long answer is what it's done is proved that empirically you need a system beyond empiricism to have a true apprehension of reality. So that's a bit like 301 level, right? But the short answer is yes. And Dean, I'm in his book, Real Magic. He quotes me several times in it. I love Dean. And essentially, if you look at the last 150-year story of parapsychology, it has been a empirical discovery that, coming back to the first question, we live in a magical universe, and we just spent the last 3 centuries pretending that we didn't. And I think there's a potency in that if people are moving into the kind of work that you share on this show or the kind of work that I do, there's a potency for a lot of people who, one way or the other, to get magic to work or manifestation to work, you have to feel it in your bones. You have to know that you are magic, the universe is magic, and what you are doing is magic. And for some people who are empirically minded or have come from like, I'm hearing it and intellectually I'm into it, the way I can get myself there performatively, the way I can get myself into, a ritual headspace is I need to look at some data that I need to look at, peer-reviewed data that shows that things like telephone telepathy, things like remote healing, all of this kind of stuff has been studied and demonstrated for the last 150 years. And parapsychology is not just an amazing and fascinating discipline in its own right. It has tremendous, it's almost unfair to say utility, but tremendous utility for people who are on the kind of, or seeking and manifesting the kind of lives that you talk about on the show.
Thank you. And it even, when you look at, I think it's Six Sigma, you're talking about results that way exceed the efficacy of things like aspirin. Now, you mentioned manifestation. I have outside, we're revealing it in tonight on a YouTube Live. I have a 44-foot RV, the most expensive kind, the most, I don't even know how to put it, rolling home, studio, amazing place, and the most amazing truck to pull this thing down the road. That was only a glimmer in our imagination. Apparently, we had thought about it for years, but we didn't get serious about it till 6 weeks ago. 3 weeks to get the RV, 3 weeks to get the truck. They're in my driveway, and I am going, this is magic. How in the world did we do this? When we play with energy, what's possible?
We haven't reached the edges of that, right? So one of the things, again, coming back to some of the errors in European thinking that we've inherited politically with the Reformation and so on 5-6 centuries ago, one of the things they had to do is say that miracles probably don't exist, or we no longer live in a time of miracles, because you had all these Protestant movements trying to underpin or trying to undercut, and with very good reason, Catholic claims of power, right? So the Eucharist and all these things that kept people embedded in the Catholic system. And one of them was this idea of miracles and saints and so on. And so politically, you had Lutherans and others trying to say like, well, I don't think we live in the age of miracles anymore. That was the time of of biblical times. Now we don't. And you think, well, that's disappointing. I think we do. And I think, again, that's one of those ways of thinking that we only find coming down sort of European philosophy. You go outside of that and people will take miracles and our co-creative capacity as given.
Can you share with us, I want to dive into a lot of how-tos today. What is one simple way that we can start playing with magic? And do we need to define magic first?
Sure. So I would say magic is using or rediscovering innate human qualities and capacities, things that like breathing and seeing out of two eyes and walking on two legs, that is a human birthright that we've, again, abandoned or pretended isn't there, but is the birthright of every human. So humans co-create reality with whoever you think is in charge of whatever's going on down here, right? And magic is a word for those capacities, for the capacity for manifestation, for telepathy, for clairvoyance, and so on. So that's what I think. I think that's a good, because people are like, well, is it, it can be a scary term depending on your cultural background, and sometimes it is, but it's certainly not in the context we're talking about. For me, it is the description of those innate capacities that it is up to us and part of our individual journeys to claim, because I think we use them all the time, because we're always dreaming and we're always like, oh, that's funny, like weird deja vu from a dream, and oh, I was just thinking about you when you called. So it's almost like everyone is a magician, and the goal is to come to terms with that. And that's sort of my definition of magic and a magician at the sort of level we're working with here. As for how to begin, it is very much, angels are of course a category of spirits. It's very much stepping up to it. So it is calling in, and you can start with your own ancestors. I recommend things like setting up a little boveda or sort of mantelpiece altar, that kind of stuff, a space in your life for spirit, a space in your life, and however that is for you, if that is angels or what have you, because the co-creative capacity of humans only works when you step up to it or step into it. And what you need to do, particularly if you aren't, I think most people are, they just don't realize it, if you aren't naturally clairvoyant or clairaudient, is in that first little ceremony, some flowers or whatever, you ask these beings, angels or ancestors or whatever you're going with, like, I'm, at least in this lifetime, new to this, so I'm a bit dense. You have to please make this very obvious. Please make your presence in my life very obvious, and in a good way, without causing any undue destruction to it. And then you'll start getting weird stuff happening. So again, if you're dealing with Michael or Raphael or what have you, so the guy from the gas company on the phone will be called Raphael, or anything else. I'm literally being called by Raphael. Your life will become magical and kind of humorous, but not good humor. It's almost like pun humor when you ask the spirits for operational, like, access to your life or their life. You're surrounded by a lot of puns, a lot of unusual synchronicities and coincidences. You go, well, that's not just weird, it's also like a dad joke. And that's how you can tell they showed up. That's the sign of it. And once that happens, the story of Western magic in general, grimoires, whatever you want to find, is about an initial contact event. And then once that happens, the dialogue is between you and those particular spirits. So the whole story of sort of European grimoire magic is how you get that first contact event. And then after that, it's you and the spirits.
Thank you. I have several questions I want to go on there. You're calling it grimoire magic. What does that mean?
So we call it, it's almost like an academic term, but from about, let's just say, this is a long story, let's just say 1150 AD, there was a collection of manuscripts, Solomonic manuscripts and so on, that arrived from Byzantium, Constantinople, Byzantium, into northern Italy, and then spread up over the next few centuries of angel magic in particular. So it was lists of different spirits and techniques for how to call them, like a ceremonial circle on the ground, and you've got to fast for a few days, and different religious prayers. You might have to go to mass. It depends on the manual, but there are these techniques for, here is how you talk to an angel or a particular spirit. And once that happens, I mean, you know exactly what it's like. The game is literally get that contact event, and then it's up to you and those beings. And so the European magical tradition is essentially one of introduction. And then after that, it's up to the magician and the angels or spirits in question.
Excellent. A couple of things. I want to go back to the introduction in a second, but I'm thinking of my coyote dog Pumpkin that I had for over 17 years. She was probably 2/3, 3/4 coyote. I had 3 of them at first, but ended up with 1 for her whole lifetime. And I would say that she had trickster energy. She was a coyote. Clearly, she was a trickster. Why is it that when spirit comes to us, it is such trickster, neither good nor bad, but it is like you say, they're coming in puns, they're coming in plays. Why is there such trickster energy?
I think that's just how, this is my take, right? I think that's just how messages have to cross dimensions. If they don't, we won't hear them. So there's an idea amongst some Amazonian peoples. There's the spirits speak in a language called Sai Yoshto Yoshto, or language twisting. And the reason for that is and so humans, the Amazonian shamans, will have code words for different beings. So an anaconda will be a hammock. So you will refer to anaconda spirit as a hammock, because if you say anaconda spirit, the word crashes into the being and you can't get contact. There is something about communicating with spirit that it has to run through metaphor or symbol, or we just won't hear it. And I think that's why Trickster is central to any of these kind of is a central phenomena or archetype in any of these sort of interactions. Because if it was as clean as a one-to-one conversation like we're having here, Michael, if talking to Michael on over the internet was the same category as talking to Michael the Archangel, everyone would be doing it that way. And I think it's honestly, there is something baked into crossing dimensions that requires that. It requires either ceremony, which itself is like performed symbol, or it requires use of metaphor. And that coming back looks like Trickster, looks like weird number plate puns and all the other kind of stuff, because there's no other, if the communication was clean, we'd have clean communication.
Which begets the whole system, which we may or may not dive into today. But I want to go to calling in our ancestors, calling in our loved ones. I love thinking of, Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, and this day where the veil is thinnest, and being able to contact our ancestors, which for people who've had NDEs, oftentimes they're there. They're waiting for us. They are waiting for us. What's the power and calling in our ancestors or loved ones on the other side, and how do we begin doing that?
Yeah, so if you ask any decent anthropologist or archaeologist, their best guess, and I think it's a good one, is that mankind's first quote-unquote religion, it's a dumb term going that far back, it's almost a dumb term today, was some sort of, and I don't even like to call it ancestor worship, I would say ancestral interaction or sustained contact with family and tribe members after they had passed. And the logic behind it is very good, which is who else is going to have your back but your family? And even if in this incarnation you've chose to, or have been subjected to, and many people have, not the best childhoods, put it that way. You are nevertheless the scion of 2 million years of humans, and they can't all be trash going back 2 million years. So one of the things you learn when you step into ancestor work to begin with is to work with the well ancestors, the elevated dead, and you ask them, like the well ancestors and elevated dead on my father's line or my mother's line. So may your blessings continue to flow down to your descendants here in the physical, and you start with it that way, because you essentially, you don't become perfect when you die. So there's sort of a bunch of generations between here, like my grandmother, on my mother's side in particular, does not spend much time at my ancestor altar. She's still got work to do, as we all will, but she's still got work to do. And isn't necessarily actively involved in the way ancestors in an ancestral magic sense are in the family. The ancestors, the well ones on the other side, are working with her as much as they are us, right? So how that manifests in your life is it's sort of plugging the house back into the mains after you've had a blackout or something. Life runs smoother because you've essentially added more people to your team, and people who by definition have your best interest in heart. You are their descendants, they are family, and so on. So it manifests as a general, this is the best luck magic you will find, working with the ancestors. And it is as simple as becoming aware of them like that, putting flowers and pictures and maybe a glass of water and a white candle or what have you in an area, just to say I acknowledge and remember and have gratitude for everything that people up my family lines have had to do for me to be here on this planet right now. Because you go back doesn't matter how far you go back, we're talking hunter-gatherers and so on. There were a lot of struggle to make sure that you and I are here now to have this conversation. And even just that act of gratitude is enough to begin the process. And it starts to show up in your life. It may be dreams and weird. Your great aunt will call and say, do you want the family Bible? Because I'm moving into a care home and it's got everyone's births and deaths and where and when they married and so on. So you might suddenly end up with all this ancestral information. But operationally, why you do it as a magician is it's luck magic. It is this sort of generalized improvement in your luck once that happens.
Can you, for people who are adopted and may not know, or there is a dear friend of mine who lost his home. In fact, he lost all the photos, all the ancestral photos. He even lost, I think he had his great-grandmother's portrait on the fireplace, and it burned. If we don't have that attachment or connection or images to our well ancestors, is it enough to put the flowers there to make a prayer
Definitely.
or blessing?
The reality is when the sort of elevated beings on your own ancestral lines that you would want to work with first well and truly predate photography and even oil paintings, to be honest, especially if you're of European descent. You are going back a couple of millennia very often to find like guardians of lineages and those kind of powerful beings. And they're waiting for you to do it, right? Because they're like, well, we did this for 150,000 years. Then 2,000 years ago, you stopped. Let's get this party back, if you will. So absolutely. And as for people who are adopted, you have additional lineages, right? So, and in fact, that was a ritual magic technique in places like ancient Rome, where you would adopt someone. You would adopt a son if you didn't have other children, to make sure that someone would tend to your ancestral practice once you had passed on. So to have parents who aren't biological is not a barrier in any way to ancestor work. You just have additional lines. You have your blood ancestors, and you have the parents who raised you. The parents who raised you, you are in that ancestral line. Absolutely. You're in both of them. And an entire kind of magical praxis have been built around that in the classical world.
Thank you. So we could kind of call this in steps or in some sort of order. We want to set up some sort of an altar. We want to call in the ancestors. We want to call in those well ancestors and make that connection, I'm assuming, on a regular, repeated basis, to sort of like neurons that fire together, wire together. We want to grow a stronger connection.
Absolutely. So my little farm down here, we have an old hearth in the kitchen. So that's where my Boveda or Ancestor Altar is. And the good thing about that, and this is sort of a little couch situation next to it or near it, if I'm having a cup of tea or something in the middle of the day, I can kind of sit there in that kind of ancestral energy and almost like have tea with my ancestors as I'm doing it. So it doesn't even need to be, you know this from angel magic, right? Like, it doesn't even need to be anything. You don't need to run out and buy fancy robes, put it that way. It is honestly, it's sitting there in the intention and the gratitude. And if this is resonating with you, chances are you're the person alive. It appears that the ancestors pick a being in each family line to be like, well, you get to tend the fires. You get to be the person who knows where everyone's buried and all that kind of stuff. If you are the person that the rest of the family rings going like, where's Uncle Jim buried? What graveyard was that? This is a natural next step, and they will make that arrangement for you. And it's very interesting. It's not just luck magic in your life. When you make that connection, I have 4 siblings. When you make that connection and you have wellness rather than ancestral curses and all the other stuff, all those kind of negative inheritances coming down lines, you are changing that field for every member of your family who's in the physical, right? And you don't even need to tell them about it. It's just the kind of thing. Many people who listen to a show like this, by virtue of the fact you're listening to a show like this, you're probably that person in the family. And I think if you're listening to it, you're resonating with that idea.
Thank you. So let's go to the next step. And you were talking about angels and angel magic. Is a next step for us to be calling in the angels or spirits or other gods or deities? What would a next step be in starting to crank up our magic for what you call success in life? And you say success leads to wealth. Wealth is just a piece. Actually, I would call that maybe a symptom. It is one tangible sign of being in the magic.
Yeah, it in many respects. So in Chaos Protocols, the way I write it is you need to have an event in your life, and we discussed this when you were on my show because you've had NDEs. You need to have an event in your life that makes you realize that you are playing a bigger game, that just that what is available to the five senses isn't it. Like, in fact, that is a tiny, tiny fraction of what's actually going on, right? And that can be anything. It can be negative, like I joke in it that if you've been abducted by aliens or something, you already know that the universe, and so you don't need to go through that step of having a profound spiritual experience one way or the other that makes you know in your bones. Because the funny thing about being in modern Western culture is that that sense of spirit, you can read all the, like Dean Radin's book Real Magic, you can read that, get to the end of it and go, wow, life changed. And then about 10 days later, that feeling has dissolved a little. Like you put a baby's tooth in Coca-Cola, right? And it starts to dissolve. You need an event that gets the awareness that you live in a magical or spiritual universe deep into your bones. And an NDE will do it, Michael, of course. And I joke in the book that if you want to get a couple of friends and an Ouija board and break into an abandoned mental hospital in the middle of the night, which is not recommended.
No, you've got to understand. After my first NDE, they moved me from the main hospital to a former mental ward. And the energy, and it was in a cockeyed corner room with a slanted roof. And I'm like, I have to get the hell out of here now.
Yeah. Because obviously I was a very cool child. I was in choir at school, and we went to a choir camp on an island in a place called the Hawkesbury River, which is north of Sydney. And this island used to be a mental hospital for like violent mental patients in that really high Victorian, like 1890s to 1920s sense, creepy. And obviously we weren't in the ruins of this old hospital. We were in the support buildings that was still there. I've been a lot of spirity places over the course of my career. That one was intense, and it is in fact why I used as a joke that example in the book. Because the point is, at 2 a.m. when you run screaming from that building, you will never question the reality of spirits again. And I'm saying that's not a recommended way in the slightest, but what I mean is if you maybe did that in your errant youth, or if Discovery Channel's done a show in your house about ghosts or whatever, you don't need to make that step. The rest of us need to have an event, and there are ceremonies you can do. Taking ayahuasca in an appropriate setting is one of those kind of things that you go, wow, humans are playing a bigger game. That's the first and most powerful step. It's almost like the practice of magic is binary. It is, you need to find what that is. In the book, I call it becoming invincible, because once you realize that you can't die, you are playing a very different game. And it's not an easier game. It is a game with more consequences. What you do becomes more consequential.
Tell me more on that, because we're also talking about samsara, letting go of attachment, and at the same time we're talking about becoming more consequential.
If I all of a sudden realize that I live in a universe of beings rather than atoms, then I'm not going to clear cut the forest, and I'm going to be aware that things like trauma, which you'd learn with ancestral work, flows down ancestral lines. So I'm going to be, I don't know what the swearing is on the show, but I'm going to be less cruel. And I'm going to be aware that the decisions I make in that Marcus Aurelius sense echo in eternity. So that's what I mean by more consequential. You can't die. That's great. Like it changes the game. It's like, well, I can't die, so I'm going to go after my destiny anyway. But I do want my destiny to be something other than becoming a billionaire in the oil and gas industry, or something where you go, hang on, that's maybe you want to jump back to becoming invincible, because it's not just aware of your own immortality, it's aware of your own immortality in a universe of beings. And that's what I mean by more consequential. It's more fun, certainly, but you realize, and we discussed this when you were on my show, in ayahuasca sessions, one of my sessions, the thing that, on one of my purgings, I purged out thousands and thousands and thousands of little accidental curses that I had made. And a curse shows up in the spirit world as an agreement with a being, some little nasty spirit who's willing to do that thing for you. So someone cuts you off in traffic and you flip them and you say something terrible like, oh, I hope you crash, or whatever. A being hears that and it's like, I'll take it. It's very much like the movie The Labyrinth. So say the words. And I purged all of that out going, whoa, did not know that happens. And now when someone cuts me off, I still get the flash of, And then I'm like, do you know what? I'm not going to curse that person, because that's in fact what happens, and you absorb that into your field. So that it's more consequential is the right way of thinking about it. You're playing a game where you can't die, but you're playing a game that all of a sudden has consequences and meaning.
Thank you, and that is absolutely huge. And when I catch myself going even slightly down that road, I'll send them love. I want to go right to the reverse. I send you love, and I mean it. I really do mean it. Going to Wayne Dyer for a second. He says, you must die while you're still alive. And what you're talking about is you're calling in, you're actually setting the intention, and you're going to step forward into an event. I have no other way to put this. We can call this like step 4, destroy your life. We need to destroy the entire paradigm of what you think of existed. And then you get to realize every action, every thought, every single thing you do, say, or breathe is a prayer, is a blessing, and you're being watched because every one of those things is an energy going out to the universe.
Absolutely, absolutely. The original meaning of born again Christian is that dying in life. So if you go back to the first few centuries where Christianity was actually multiple Christianities working out what it wanted to be, there's Gnosticism and so on. To be a born-again Christian is someone who has died in life. And that is the same idea we find in shamanism. Shamans have to die whilst physical, and shamanism and philosophy in general, many people have said this, like Terence McKenna, is essentially preparation for death. And the best preparation for death is some form of rehearsal, right? That's becoming invincible. And so in the book, I say magic will destroy your life, and that's a feature, not a bug.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And so if you're listening to this, if you're watching this today, understand that what we're talking about is like sort of like having a Kundalini experience where you will never, ever, ever go back to the way you were. And so you have to be ready. Once you start playing with magic, things get, to use a good English term, squidgy around the edges, shall we say.
Definitely. And hopefully, and I'm sure you're the same, and we can put that out there, the Becoming Invincible experiences listeners to the show have is more in the order of, I cannot believe I ended up with this 44-foot top of the line thing that came out of my head. And like, who expected this ever? I hope it's something like that. If it's a miraculous manifestation that, and here's the thing, don't let anyone else, almost don't tell anyone else, but certainly don't let anyone else know that, like, this is my Becoming Invincible experience. I manifested this. This is proof of magic, because they won't see it. They can't see it because it's not in their bones and so on. So when you have it and you know that, and you know in your bones, as everyone does, there's a curious quirk to magical results where they don't look like it to anyone else, but you will go to the Supreme Court to defend it. Like, it's nope. This was manifestation. It's in my bones. That's totally what happened. So it doesn't, I mean, we joke about it because I'm that serious about it that if it is an alien abduction or a seance in an abandoned mental hospital, please don't let it be those things. But the reason I joke about it is because it's serious. You have to have an event that's like that. And I want it to be a manifestation one. And if it is that, shut up. Don't tell anyone. And in fact, that's one of the sort of classical rules of magic that we got from Eliphas Levi. These are called like the 4 secrets of the Sphinx, or the four laws of the Sphinx: to know, to will, to dare, and to keep silent. Right, and that's crucial. We know that through New Thought work and manifestation. Don't tell anyone else. It doesn't matter how you experience it. People experience it as well. I feel like that dissolves my energy a bit, the energy towards a manifestation. Or you can be glib about it, like William Shatner once said. If you want to get screwed, tell your plans to God. And I love that, because what I assume he means is don't tell people your plans. It's not the right channel of manifestation, right? It's what happens then is that the plans become words in the universe rather than physical things in the universe. So if you're, and I hope it is for everyone, if your Becoming Invincible experience is a miraculous manifestation of some kind, keep silent.
I have got this huge Cheshire cat grin here. I was driving the RV back yesterday, and I'm in the middle of the desert. There's no radio. There's no this. There's no that. I haven't figured out the satellite system yet. Poor me. Poor me. And watch that. Blessed me. Blessed me. and I managed to get YouTube audio going. and it is an interview with William Shatner from 3 weeks ago, from his 90th birthday. Then I'm prepping for this interview earlier today, and I am William Shatner doing a VRBO advertisement. Then you just mentioned William Shatner, and the line that is up on my screen and my notes here is, what do you mean the goal should be to increase the total volume of positive synchronicities in your life?
That's it. Oh, maybe you should get William Shatner on the show. That would be a one to talk. Maybe that's what this is. Let's put that one out there. I would love to listen to that.
All right. I will do that. So before we dive into this next piece, in fact, we might talk about the Magnificent Game of the King next. Before we do that, 4 people are going, I haven't had this experience. I'm so jealous of people, please don't be, who've had a near-death experience. You don't want one. Or at least you don't want the pieces leading up to it. And if they don't have access yet, and the West is opening up a lot more to things like ayahuasca, and they don't want to go to a sanitarium, what is a simple way that they can crack the walnut open?
So in the chapter, there is a rite that comes from the Greek magical papyri in the chapter in the book that we're talking about. And you don't have to buy the book to do it. You just can Google the headless rite. And you will find it. Now, this is actually an exorcism rite. So it's a spell it was put down by a Theban sorcerer who was, well, actually, he was a Theban priest who was moonlighting as a sorcerer in sometime in the 300s. Obviously, Thebes being in Egypt, and it's the most incredible and important collection of magical texts we have from the Hellenistic era, because it's like a bundle of papyri, hence the name Greek magical papyri, of a jobbing sorcerer, someone you would go to the way the priest system worked in Egypt at the time was that they weren't required full time. So you'd go home to work. Once the flood had happened of the Nile, you'd go home to plant your crops or whatever. So you maybe only worked for a third of the year as a priest, but you were initiated as a result of that. So people would come to you on the off days to have their astrology done or to have spirits removed from their house or what have you, right? And we have one jobbing sorcerer's workbook. And one of the rites in it is called the headless rite, which is to expel spirits. But if you know, and it's too long to go into here, but the last 150 years of the magical tradition involving things like the Golden Dawn and Aleister Crowley and so on, this rite, even mistranslated as it was in the 19th century, is sort of at the base of a bunch of amazing channeling and other experiences that happened in the early 20th century. So even mistranslated and used in a context where it isn't an exorcism, where it is an initiatory rite, it has these profound effects in reality. And the headlessness that is involved, I interpret as like, there's a French term, la tête ailleurs, like the head elsewhere. And we would say away with the fairies. And the idea is like the removal of the head. So St. John the Baptist, who of course brought spirit down into, like may literally have brought God. That's some Christian sects would have believed that. John the Baptist is more the center of the religion because he literally brought God into the physical when he baptized Jesus, right? Headless. So all around the world, going back 30 to 50,000 years, there is something about, and not in a grisly sense, because you do get put back together, but like the removal of the head is a metaphor, coming back to how you can't talk directly about these things. The removal of the head is a metaphor of your head being in spirit, right? So that's why it's called the headless rite. And it's very simple. It's a few lines. If you do this, keep a dream journal. And it doesn't have to be this rite. I just wanted to pick, I'm fascinated by it because it transformed, for better and for worse, the kind of like Western magical tradition. So that's in there, and you can do that, or you can just Google the headless rite. It will be something like it. You have to step into a invitational ceremonial context and then wait and show up and see what happens. And you'll end up going on like quite literally a magical journey. You'll end up having enough strange things around you that it builds critical mass to that becoming invincible moment.
Thank you. I'm thinking of my first ayahuasca journey. I'm laying on, in ceremony, I'm laying on a conveyor belt moving toward a metal serpent with like out of industrial London or someplace, giant serrated teeth, opening and closing, belching fire behind, that was waiting to chomp my head off.
Yeah. That's very interesting that it was metallic, like industrial, because ayahuasca or Sachamama, whoever it is, once you're in there, ayahuasca does like some swallowing, right? It's interesting that it was metal. I like maybe we interpret that as the inevitability of your invincibility, Michael. Like maybe she's showing it that way, like this was always going to happen to you.
Well, she also did show me when I asked, how old am I? She showed me this. She showed me a room that was like a tile room, like a domino. And then the next room, and then the next room, and a Fibonacci sequence laid out over and over and over and over and over, which is the age of all of us, which is infinite. And it laid out life. It was just such a brilliant way of showing us that we are not this limited time and space here. I want to go from there to a song which is stuck in my head since I was a kid, and I told myself I was not going to go there today. But I am going to go there. Charlie Daniels Band. The devil went down to Georgia. He was looking for a soul to steal. He was in a bond because he was way behind because he was willing to make a deal. When he came across this young man sawing a fiddle and playing it hot, he jumped up on a hickory stump. He said, "Boy, let me tell you what. Now, I bet you didn't know it, but I'm a fiddle player too. And if you care to take a dare, I'll make a bet with you." Tell us, who in the world is Lucifer? Tell us about Robert Johnson, The Deal with the Devil, and what does this mean for us?
So we'll start with Robert Johnson, and there is a Netflix documentary, a short one, about him, because as far as most people can tell, and it may not have happened, although it's now a century later, so who knows? He is the archetypal blues magician who went to the Crossroads and made a deal with the devil to get really, really good at music and at guitar playing and so on. And he traded on that. He died very young, which is the other reason why the story has grown up around him. It's like, well, maybe in that Mephistophelian sense, maybe he didn't check the fine print and didn't ask for a long life as a musician, right? Because the devil, like, we'll get to how and why that works, but like the devil has that. We're coming back to the trickster logic. So but that archetypal idea has been there since it's a mean way of saying it, but it's not wrong, since we invented the idea of the devil. The devil, that doesn't mean the devil's not real, but what it means is the devil is how, coming back to the trickster has shown up in European mythology, religion, and so on. And the trouble is, if you can't avoid the devil. It doesn't mean do devil worship. What it means is if you don't have, and Jung recognized this is where I got the idea in the book. If you haven't come into some form of relation with the idea of the trickster, the archetype of the trickster, you are psychologically unhealthy and unbalanced, and your life isn't quite coherent. So there's and I use the Jungian analysis of that when it comes to the devil and the Crossroads. The Crossroads for millennia has been, again, another one of these metaphors of where the spirit world meets the physical. So when you do a metaphoric thing like go to the Crossroads and make a pact with the devil, if you unpack what's happening there, you are going to a place between the worlds and engaging the trickster, which is a fraught process, certainly, for some kind of subsequent manifestation. And even if it's just to know it's there, and that's a weird way of saying it, in a Jungian sense, even to come to terms with that archetype, it doesn't mean you have to do it. You have to come to, like, well, what goes on there? Because it's not just blues musicians. If you look at how the sort of magic we and you do now would have got us burned a couple of centuries ago, and not even that long ago, right? And
I grew up in the town that was, Salem was a subset of the town that I grew up in. The first witches, in quotes, that were drowned were half a mile from my house, buried half a mile from my house.
That doesn't surprise me. That's interesting. The devil. So I have in the book and other books a proverbial Portuguese grandmother. And let's say her granddaughter wants to marry the sort of feckless son of the blacksmith or what have you. This woman will go to mass on Sunday morning, and then she'll toddle off into the woods on her own of a Sunday evening, or Saturday evening is probably better for it. And that's where she will, as a devout, believing Catholic woman, will do the sort of manifestation or life improvement exercises, which is what we call them now. She may or may not call in the devil to do that, but she knows full well she's doing the devil's work. And in a folk magic sense, what that means is she goes to church every week, sometimes every day, and the priest tells her that God himself has set the devil as ruler of this world. And we get that as this kind of hatred of the physical from the Hellenistic world. We get that as a wrong idea, but in the head of someone who wants to do magic, it's like, well, I need to change the physical. I'm going to go to the boss, right? And this is why things like fortune telling and any of these kind of folk magics, all the kind of women's powers, all that sort of stuff is considered the work of the devil, and all these people who were burned and drowned and so on. In a few isolated cases in Scotland and Italy, they did appear to be like balls out worshiping the devil. But everyone else is like, what are you doing to me? I have angels and I go to church and what have you. And you have to come to terms with that one way or the other, or it'll come to terms with you. So there's a whole chapter about like the devil in there and how you can do that, because you need to, if you're going to be doing magic in the magical sense, and identifying as it one way or the other, the devil gets his dues, or maybe you end up like Robert Johnson otherwise. Who knows?
So that brings up, I live out here in the desert for about 4 more weeks until we embark on this amazing journey here. And we will be setting many blessings and going to a very high level for this journey coming up. But in the desert, there are lots of roads that meet at crossroads. And it's very quiet. So we could go sit out there night after night. Is there something that would be good for us to do?
That will do it, especially if you can play a guitar or something. Now, like the crossroads, that just meditations upon crossroads, especially at night, will get you there. Because again, if you live in a magical universe, you live in a symbolic and metaphoric universe, and that means all crossroads are places of the devil anyway, in that Portuguese grandmother sense, places of the devil anyway. They are places where spirit meets physical, and they've always been that. If you go back to ancient and classical Greece, when people would leave offerings for Hecate, that was always at the graveyards, crossroads, right? That was always at the crossroads because she governed crossroads. So you would, I'm glad we've moved on from this, but you would bury a sacrificed dog because she also governed dogs or whatever. I know. And you wouldn't turn around. Whatever you heard behind your back, you would not turn around, or you might die, because there's some, and coming to an awareness of what the crossroads are and how we've used them is in fact that process. And in a way it should be scary, not Halloween scary. It should be, wow, it's significant, right? And it's intense and potent. It should be an awareness of the potency of it, not necessarily scary. I would put that at a 201 level. I think people can kind of, especially if you begin with ancestors and find which beings in the spirit world, be they angels or whatever you're resonating with, at that point you can level up. Because there's certainly much energy to be found somewhere like that.
Thank you. It's interesting. This kind of takes us off topic, and I want to keep us on topic. There's a few more how-tos I want to get to before we do some sort of a brilliant meditation that I know is going to come to you for the end. But it's interesting. I was reading something about the symbolism of Lot's wife looking back, Sodom and Gomorrah turning into a pillar of salt. And I'm trying to remember what that metaphor stood for, whether it was going into the thinking mind by looking backwards, but you literally just brought that up and saying, don't look backwards.
So a guy I have on my show a lot, and someone I think is a genius, frankly, is Rice University's Dr. Jeff Kripal, written some amazing books, most recent one being Secret Body. But he makes a very good point that if you look at the Bible, just in reference to the devil and so on, encounters with God can kill you. So the sort of like, oh, I'm not going to do anything dangerous. Welcome to Earth. And that is a crossroads meditation. Encounters with God can kill you because, of course, we have, I'm the Lord, I created the light and the dark, right? The Bible literally says like God is, and this is why the Portuguese grandmother can go out and justify doing the devil's work and then going to church, because the Bible says God created both of these things, the light and the dark. And so that's the level, because I know it can be, especially depending on people's childhoods, there's a lot to unpack in the archetype of the devil, and you don't necessarily need to do it. I would say Crossroads, you probably eventually need to sit with and think with, because it does contain these ideas of encounters with God can kill you, and that not looking back, that is an ancient process, like an ancient practice. If you are leaving offerings for spirit, don't look back. There's a whole kind of, and it's a different show. There's the use of eyes and perspective and perspectivism, who sees what and how, is how all Amazonian magic works. And we can kind of see that there in sort of Hermetics and so on. But the sight lines and who sees what when transforms relationships magically. And when you know that, you can use it. But if you don't know it, you might get eaten.
How important. This is going to tangent again. Then I promise I will bring us back. So I'm a gazer. I'm not suggesting it for anybody, but every morning at sunrise, I am affixed. She and I become one for a minute or so, but I've now started to work on that peripheral vision. And so this morning I'm looking at her with one side and I'm looking at her with the other side, and I'm opening up different sight lines. That really goes beyond the scope of today. But what do you know about that?
That's very good practice. Looking at the sun is the opposite. Like that's a very good, well, they're not directly at the sun. Like let's not do your like eclipses and former presidents and all that, but like, look, the sun is almost archetypally opposite something like the devil or the crossroads, right? So if you have a practice of visually engaging with the sun, perceptually, her eyes, your eyes, his eyes, your eyes. I'm glad you said her. I could come back to why. That still kind of works, quote unquote, in the same way. Not the underlying metaphysics of why that quote unquote works is the same underlying metaphysics of why you wouldn't turn around once you've left an offering for Hecate at the crossroads, right? Because it shows that there is metaphysical significance in not just human sightlines, because human sightlines are enmeshed in far more complex ways of seeing, but we are participating in this sort of complex meshwork of seeing.
Thank you. So let's go from there, and I want to briefly touch base on tarot and precognition, because you say it's actually this dance. We're going to get to shoaling in a minute. It's this dance of precognition and staying away from the, I'll put negative in quotes, but staying out of the potholes, and then focusing on the smooth roads that can help us in life.
Yeah, so this comes back to that idea that you have to approach the spirit world obliquely or symbolically, and that's baked into spirit communication, right? And this is why I find tarot, I love tarot. I've been reading it and teaching it for years. I think it's amazing. And it's amazing whether you, and this comes back to someone's underlying metaphysics. It's amazing whether you think it invites you to not just to form an opinion on how the tarot works is to form an opinion on how the universe works, right? Because one of my teachers, Camelia Elias, she will say, well, they're just pictures on card. And she's, as far as I can tell, one of the best tarot teachers in the world. And that's true. But then it's like, cool, then how do you think images work? Like, that's the sort of whole point. It's not that there's anything, there doesn't even need to be anything sacred or symbolic or archetypal as you get deeply into, oh, well, this is the 10 or the number 7 has this sort of significance, and you drew the Pope card or whatever. Like, tarot will be a language that forms between you and the universe, and it'll be this sort of oblique or spirit language, and it allows for that enigma, that enigmatic way of seeing the future that I think is healthier than the sort of overconfidence that you get with early tarot. This is, 18th century French tarot. You can go all the way back to like 11th and 12th century fortune telling in Italian taverns, and people knew that the future was mysterious. And so the answers you would get would be enigmatic and invitational and triggering. So you don't get an exact roadmap of what you should do. The cards invite you to form or come into a different relation with the future. And that looks very much like, and so it constellates around questions, which means it looks very much like, coming back to psi data and parapsychology, the results you get with remote viewing, where the whole kind of process swings around the question, and it doesn't really exist before that. And time doesn't work. So people will start getting results when Stargate program was doing the tests on, well, we will randomly send people out to a field or a carnival or a pier and get the remote viewers to see where they are. The remote viewers would be picking up, oh, I'm seeing them in a field and they're drinking coffee and whatever, before the targets actually even got there, and before they knew they were going there. But as soon as the sort of ritual was engaged, which is like, well, we're going to do some remote viewing testing, the results started coming. And tarot is not the same as that, but it is of a similar kind, where as soon as you bring a question to the cards, you are in ceremony and you're kind of changing your relationship to the future. So it's the left hand to the right hand of manifestation, coming back to your question. So magical techniques would be the how I manifest that future. Fortune telling techniques are that kind of ongoing process of how as I manifest and change the conditions of reality sort of further up the timeline. Something like tarot allows you to get insights into, okay, well, I need to pivot it in this direction. Now, particularly when you're doing magical results, there's a lot of trust in manifestation, and it will show up. And sometimes it'll be weird. It will always be weird, but it will be like either exactly what you want or exactly what you asked for in that annoying way, and you should have asked a better question. Magical campaigns are more steps. They're sort of better suited to like climbing a career ladder or something. They're ongoing campaigns, which means you have different magical techniques or magical operations, and then you do cards to see how that worked and how that changed the future. And the cards will sort of show you different opportunities to move the campaign in this direction or that direction. And you put the two of them together, and it's like a left hand, right hand approach of very often more detailed manifestation. And a lot of people resonate with that, especially if they have, trust issues with the universe, which is a big thing to get over for sure. You can sit back and go, I'm going to manifest this and then do it. Or you can kind of get your hands in and go left hand, right hand.
And it's what I love about it and love about the cards, and there's always a deck around me. Oh, there's one. There's always a deck around me somewhere, is we're cultivating a relationship.
Yep.
On that note, you mentioned symbols, you mentioned images again a minute ago. I didn't know I'd be going there as well, but what can you tell us about sigil magic, and is there a simple way we can begin playing with it?
Yes. Well, so the most popular post on my blog ever, and it's old now, it's over a decade old, is called Sigils Reboot. But if you just Google Rune Soup sigils, that page will come up, and it's in the book, but that blog post has everything you need for it. So sigil magic is a way of turning precise statements into targets for magical energy. So you can, whatever it is, it's a precision manifestation technique. So whatever it is you're manifesting, if it's a 44-foot RV or whatever, you will write something like, I am driving a 44-foot RV. And then you do this process where you remove some letters and you combine it. And then you ceremonially activate that sigil, right? And a lot of people resonate with that technique. I didn't initially, and then did. It kind of comes baked into chaos magic. It's been there since the 80s. But it has certainly changed my life. And the way I put it out in Sigils Reboot is in a shoal. So I got that idea from fish. And consequently, I got that idea from fish research, where about a decade ago, a British university put a robot stickleback fish in amongst some live stickleback to see how shoals formed and how schools of fish moved. And the robot fish managed to kind of like lead the living fish by making decisive movements and actions. Like if it was just kind of hanging about, it didn't do anything. But if it went in a certain direction in a rapid way or made like a sharp turn, the fish would start to form around it. And presumably that's because they kind of have a distributed intelligence where if someone's making big moves, they've either found food or they're avoiding a predator. So it's almost like you're as a fish, you distribute that intelligence to the whole skull, or the whole shoal or school, right? And I thought, well, what does that look like in sigils? Because one of the things when I was in London and looking for jobs and whatever, because I moved to London just in time for Lehman Brothers to collapse, worst time, including during the fire and the Blitz, to get a job in London. It doesn't matter. I'll just do some magic, right? And so I'm in these ongoing campaigns, and what I found a little frustrating about Sigil Magic at the time was that I couldn't get things to happen faster than about 2 weeks. And I'm like, I'm running out of money. Come on, let's see what we're doing here. And so I decided to create sigils, not just for the things I wanted, but for the things I already had, or for the things that I could guarantee were about to happen. So I eat spaghetti tonight. And if I put I eat spaghetti tonight in, I get this job at Discovery Channel and I get this blah, 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 blah. My thinking was that it would speed up the process because maybe it'll arrive by the time of the spaghetti. What it actually did was dramatically improve the results, because I'm communicating with my unconscious or whatever, or wherever you think the manifesting capacity of humans is. And so it gets these 3 messages in its pneumatic tubes: Discovery Channel job, new clothing, I'm eating spaghetti. And then spaghetti happens. And it's like, I'll get these other things sorted then. Like that's how the robofish is why I called it that. That's how it works in a sigil shoaling context. You dramatically increase not just the speed, but the likelihood that these results will happen. Because much like the tarot, because I actually think of Sigil Magic as like the inverse of tarot, like one of them's communicating up, the other's communicating down. You are trying to deal with across that symbolic divide. And as you know, especially with angels, which is hilarious because astrological angels I do a lot of work with, the spirit world doesn't understand how we experience time very well. It's like, oh, you've already got that. And I'm like, what are you talking about? What's happening? They don't. And part of their power is an inability to understand time. So how do you end run that if we're stuck temporarily down here experiencing time in a linear way? It is to give manifestation results in the physical that are associated with a point in time. So that's why the robofish has been, dare I say, my contribution to Sigil Magic and how it's sort of evolved over the years. But for people who do manifestation techniques like the ones you do on your show here, that's a great way to begin. And you don't even need to go through the UFO abduction, Robert Johnson stuff either. You can actually just kick the tires on it and start to develop that language. And one of the things I will mention as we get closer to the end, and I'm sure you know this, the first time you do magic is like the first time you go into a casino and you get beginner's luck. And what it is you go to do will more often than not just be knocked out of the park. Like you will just absolutely smash it. So if you've never done it before and you are thinking of it, bear in mind, it appears that a lot of people, same thing with remote viewing, this has been parapsychologically observed. The first time you do something like this, you're really, really good at it. Then you do unfortunately get the dip. It's like an uncanny valley style dip. And then you sort of even out to above chance, you're sort of like, oh, I'm getting a bit good. You find your level. But if this is resonating with you, make use of that beginner's luck. Like make what you are manifesting count.
Woohoo! Few last things and we'll dive into a meditation. I'm so glad you brought that up. We're talking about robofish here, and I like to talk to people about playing in their space capsule. This is the place where you're envisioning, you're visioning, you are calling in, you are being drawn toward whatever terminology we want to call in here. But it seems like when you're throwing spaghetti in there, for lack of another term, what you are doing in a sense is you are casting out doubt. You're stacking the deck in your favor to get past doubt, to get past another biggie that you mentioned is anger as well.
Yes, absolutely. So it's casting out doubt at a conscious level because it operates on the idea, which I think is probably true. I can't prove it. And I think you probably think it's true as well, which is when things don't manifest, it is a communication error. It is not an incapacity of your unconscious. Your unconscious can do anything. And it was a seeking to solve that, right? It was a seeking to solve a communication error, which doubt is one of them. Like when you go to manifest something big, you have to know it in your bones, hence becoming invincible, that your unconscious can do anything, or however you want to describe that sentence, right? Like, you know exactly what I mean. And this was a way of, and if it doesn't happen, I interpret it as a communication error rather than something that the unconscious can't do. So I was looking for a communication solve, hence the RoboFish. And I like spaghetti. What do you want?
What does a protection amulet have to do with anything?
This almost comes back to the ayahuasca discussions, which is when you step into a universe of beings, I go in and out on whether evil exists, but I am never not aware that there are beings who can be hostile to humans or dangerous to humans. I live in southern Tasmania, and we kayak, and we also have lots of sharks. So the sharks aren't evil, but I am aware that they're out there, right? And that is a really good metaphor for the spirit world in general, which is it has sharks in it, right? And so you maybe begin with a glibness about that until something will sit you down, knock you down, if you will. I'm not sure how the swearing goes. So you will want one, or you will want some kind of protective techniques, and you never really know what level to set it at, unfortunately, until something hostile happens. Now, the good news is when that does, like, humans have a tremendous innate protective capacity. It is a thing that we can do. House clearing with Palo Santo and visualizing light is nigh on impregnable. Like, you have to be calling up some, and it's not recommended, certainly not as a beginner's technique. You have to be calling up like the worst of the worst of like lists of demons for things to start getting in that, especially if it's the same house or dwelling of whatever description, whether it's on wheels or not, that has an ancestor altar in it too. So ceremony sticks around. So where you do ceremony, and it's a thing I think humans are supposed to do, and it's one of the reasons we have such a disastrous environment, like ecologically speaking. We are supposed to be in ceremony. Ceremony creates a generalized uplift in the area in which it's performed and with the beings with which we perform it. That's my meditation. So you will need some form of protection, but the good news is if you were doing ancestor work and angel work and sincere prayer and gratitude, and add on top of that an occasional spritz with Palo Santo or something similar around your dwelling, you're pretty good, right? If you do more work out in the wilds, and again, more of the hostile work, you need more stuff, and generally the manual you're working with will have it. But this is deeply ingrained in how humans experience the earth. Like, coming back to archaeology, the earliest things we find when it comes to implements are, most of them appear to be protective amulets and devices and so on, because again, it's kind of like it changes the field around you. It changes how you are in relation to the sort of world which is made up of spirits around you at any point in time. So you probably do need one if you move further along a magical career, and everyone should have some form of protection ceremony for their own dwelling. And it is honestly as simple as asking the divine to protect your house with divine light. And I love Palo Santo, so like I will use that and so on. But it is genuinely as simple as that, because humans we dwell, but in the same way that snails create shells, humans are very good, coming back to those natural techniques we have, of creating sanctuary, of creating home. It's a thing that we just know how to do, like walking and breathing and whatever. It is autonomic. And if you bring intention and awareness to it, it is nigh on impregnable.
Thank you. How often? Is it a one-time thing? Is it every full moon? Is it certainly if there's been an Ooga Booga experience, but how often in general would you do that with your home?
People fall into their own kind of rhythms of ceremony. So I use planetary days. So obviously Monday's Moon Day, Tuesday's Mars, Wednesday's Mercury, etc. Right? And each of these beings has things that draw my intention and awareness for the day. And because we live on a farm, Saturday, governed by Saturn, reasonably good for protection anyway, although you're better off with the sun if you aren't in an agricultural context. Saturday or Sunday is good, so I can include it in ceremony that way. I do daily ceremony for my own practice here, and I have a spirit room here, all that kind of stuff. So it happens to me on a daily basis. You'll feel it, right? We have another course in the Rune Soup area, a custodianship course, which has all these techniques of how you can kind of put different protective amulets and conceptualize the house as a physical body, which is how we originally did, and be aware that, like, the European tradition of how spirits get into and out of houses is really, really useful when it comes to working out your own protections and so on. Everyone dwells differently, so it's a relation you'll have to come into for yourself, but it doesn't need to be topped up as often as you think. The best thing to do is to do ceremony regularly. If you're praying for and with beings in your dwelling regularly, that changes the field anyway.
Thank you. You just triggered something. Well, it's a talk for another time we'll go to. I read a book on symbology from, like, was it the 30s? I think it was the 1930s, talking about the Temple of Luxor and how it was laid out as the physical body as a home.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's the earliest idea of us, of our dwelling psychologically, is a covering between us and the stars and the earth. And so it's this sort of womb body form. And the first dwellings, we're going back 50,000 years and more, those first dwellings were conceived of as like the body of an ancestor. So house and tribe literally were the same, and often are the same word for that reason, that you're actually in a body of an ancestor. And that's at the level that house protection magic works best. And I have a whole course on that. But even that thought is enough to trigger people on that journey anyway, and they can Google around and read around and find their own sort of process.
Very good. And on that note, where can people go to find the Chaos Protocols, to find all your beautiful work, to find starships?
That's the one.
And to find out more?
Sure. So runesoup.com, that's where my show is. That's where the blog is. And if you want to know more, we've got courses on tarot and sigil magic and all that kind of stuff. You get access to everything in the members area when you join. It's $10 a month. And yeah, the books are available basically everywhere people buy books.
Very, very good. Any last words of wisdom before we dive into a meditation which has come to you?
Have fun with it, I think. Have fun with it.
Woohoo! I love it. You've got sun on one side because clearly you're on the other.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned greeting the sun, because for people who don't know, I live in southern Tasmania, so this call happened at 7 a.m. for me. It's now 8:15 a.m. heading into winter, and that's east, right? So I actually have every morning my own little sun ceremony, whether I'm sitting at my desk or not. So yeah.
And right now you look like a perfect yin-yang. So you have one...
Or the cookie out of Seinfeld.
That would work too.
All right. If you're good to go, I'm good to go.
I'm good to go.
So we're going to begin with some box breathing. This is a 4x4 breathing technique that just allows you to drop the thoughts and cares of the day. And so take a deep breath in and out. And I'm going to count you in. And I'm going to count you in, and you're going to breathe, counting in for 4. So in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and just return to breathing normally. And what we're going to do here is an Angels of the Wind exercise. So gradually become aware of where east is for you. And if you wish to sort of point in that direction, you can. Otherwise, just become aware of where the east is. And what we're going to do as a visualization technique is to have the angels of the winds of the east come from that direction and swirl all about you like a flock of thousands of tiny birds. So we're going to breathe in, become aware of the east, and say either in your mind or after me, about me, all angels, about me, all seraphim, cherubim, and thrones. And now bring your awareness to the north. And again, about me, all angels. About me, all cherubim, seraphim, and thrones. And now bring your awareness to the west. And again, about me, all angels. About me, all cherubim, seraphim, and thrones. And finally to the south, and say, about me, all angels. About me, all cherubim, seraphim, and thrones. And now, take a few deep breaths and just feel the presence of these thousands and thousands of beings swirling, protecting around you, all the way up to the sky. And this is a protective ceremony you can do anytime you like, or if you are in need of angelic guidance. So now, before we thank them and ask them to always come when we call, just spend a moment and ask if there is a message from the angelic realm for you at this time. And then with that, send blessings and thanks to the angels of the east, and the angels of the north, and the angels of the west, and the angels of the south. And you're back in the room.
Woohoo!
Nice one.
Thank you so much, Gordon. This has been phenomenal.
Thank you indeed. It's been a fantastic chat.
So, got to crank it back up for the finish here. So for everyone out there, everyone out here, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get the chaos protocols, and begin playing with your magic today. And above and beyond all else, shine bright. Woohoo! What an amazing, special, magical show from Gordon White on using magic in your life and easy step-by-step ways to do so. If you like that and you want step-by-step ways to get in touch with your angels, get your copy of Awe, the automatic writing experience. You can get it at automaticwriting.com, or you can bring your receipt from Amazon, from Barnes & Noble, from wherever to automaticwriting.com and get lots of bonuses. In this, you're going to learn how to communicate with angels, how to call in your favorite angels, how to call in your ancestors, your loved ones on the other side, and literally put pen to paper and have them start speaking with you. To check out more amazing shows, click here. Be sure to subscribe below. Click on the bell icon to be notified of upcoming shows, YouTube premieres, live events with me. Big thumbs up if you like this. Love you guys so much. Shine bright. Woohoo!